and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I'm glad to be back. Yes, I'm back, a little jet-lagged, but I am here. Tonight's guest, we have a great guest tonight. Interesting. Been wanting him on for a long time. It's Dr. John Alexander, retired Army Colonel. A real interesting guy, quite a background. We'll be talking to him in a little bit here. Before that, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the news. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's going on. This is the last day that Joyride is going to have their platform up there, going down this evening in just a couple of hours. And so they're gone. Well, it is really a blessing in disguise, if you ask me, because now we have the whole program right on our website. So the second part of the show will be available to supporters, and you can support the show for only $1 or more per month. And we have a $1, a $2, $5, $10, and $25 subscription now. The MP3s can be played on our website and downloaded. We also have an RSS feed link that can go into almost any podcast application, including iTunes, your iPhone, and all kinds of apps that you can get on either one of those. So Sam Bosell is the one who helped me out with that. He basically set us up. Everything is working really well. There's a couple of issues, but I think we're getting them all worked out. The buck stops here. If there's any problems at all, you're going to be emailing me at martin@podcastufo.com. You go right on our website, and you can see on the menu bar, support us and sign up, and you log in on our website. I think it's great. It's a really nice system, and I appreciate your support. Any support you can give will help out. We've added a couple more expenses. With that, we're getting some great guests coming up. The skeptic Michael Shermer's coming up. We have James Fox and a lot of other really great guests coming up. So we're getting a lot of help with, like I said, with a new staff person helping with that. And one thing I am going to shout out, and one thing I'm going to ask for out there is, if anyone's a graphic designer, the person that was going to be doing my T-shirts has kind of bowed out on me in New York City. He keeps saying, next week, and it never happens. So I need T-shirt graphics. I also would like to have a banner graphic for my website. I'm not real happy with what's up there now. So if there's anyone out there that would like to do that type of work, please contact me at martin@podcastufo.com. Also, if someone wants to write a blog, I am accepting guest blogs. I never really talk about that, but I do accept guest blogs. And I guess that's enough chatting for a while. So the first hour, we're going to be talking to John Alexander about his past, all the different things he's done. And then the second hour, we're going to be talking about the Skinwalker Ranch. He was one of the researchers there. And that, to me, is a fascinating place, very eerie, a lot of stuff going on there. So right now we're going to be bringing in Alejandro Rojas for the news. How are you, Alejandro?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
Good to be back in the U.S. of A.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah. It took 26 hours to get home, and I'm still, I just got home hours ago. And so the time right now is like 3 o'clock in the morning for me. Mm-hmm. In this show.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm going to try to do a good job.
So did you have fun? I know there was this harrowing experience with this old lady who wanted to push you off of a cliff.
Yeah, well, she just hated
American.
Yeah, she hated Americans. There was a lot of people I noticed walking a very busy area on the Black Sea where I was, walking along I guess like a boardwalk type of thing with lots and lots of people. Beautiful area. But if I was talking, I would get the stink eye. People would turn around and look at me like real angry when they heard an American, because there's not a lot of American tourists in the area I was in. South Russia. And it was almost Arizona hot there. It was in the 90s, near 100 most of the time I was there.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I had a lot of near-death experiences driving.
Real? Oh, yeah. I've heard it's pretty crazy.
You know, in Chelyabinsk, when you see all the dash cams and that meteor going over, well, there's a reason everyone has a dash cam, is they want to know who they're going to have a head-on collision with. Yeah.
Well, and I guess it is for insurance purposes, because people drive so crazy that they can prove their case.
What insurance?
Allegedly, that's why they have dash cams so much out there. In fact, there's a dash cam UFO story going on right now.
Oh, really? Do you have information on that?
Russia. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really pay it much attention because, the consensus, even with the online people, is that it's a bird. But, of course, it's those crazy UK tabloids that are pushing this story of UFO may have caused a crash, and a fatal crash. And, there's a car driving along in Russia, and you see a truck, and it looks like a car must have veered in the wrong lane, got hit. And it didn't look that bad, but I guess someone died from it. But before the accident happens, there's something that comes across the sky at the top of the screen, and it does look like a bird. But, people got to sensationalize.
I was dropped at the airport. Like I said, it was 26 hours by the time you land in Moscow and then go to the towns in South Russia where I went. Got off all that traveling, got into the car, and 5 minutes later, going on a bridge, 2-lane bridge, there's a car coming right at us head on. I wasn't even in the car, 5 minutes.
Wow.
And the driver, which was my girlfriend's father, snugged it right almost under a semi so we wouldn't get hit. And I'm telling you.
You're kidding.
Nope.
Oh,
and it was
my God.
By inches. And he's not wearing a seatbelt. And, he unhooked his seatbelt just before that. And I said to my girlfriend, what's going on, And she, he doesn't wear a seatbelt. And I saw one more thing I got to say is I saw some corruption firsthand there.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
Police corruption.
Was it Putin? Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, they pull you over for absolutely no reason at all, and they take your license, they hold it in their hand, and so if you want it back, you have to pay 650 rubles, which is $100. And it's I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. So I saw that. Also, getting our pet into the country at Moscow, we had to slip a little cash to the veterinarian there.
Jeez.
On and on. It's just a lot like that. And it's just it's the way things are done. You have to, if you want to survive. You can't go down to the police department and complain either, because the chief of police is getting, his percentage from the people out there. So
that is so sad. There are a lot of South American countries, including Mexico, that's like that.
Yeah.
It's like every month you owe your boss, if you're a police officer or other government officials, you owe your boss a certain amount of money, and you owe your boss more money. And you hear, especially in South American countries, where anything, if you want anything to get done, it costs big bucks. And there's some things, if you're not rich, just don't even bother, getting a license for your car or whatever, because they're preoccupied, and, the rich people go in the queue that give them money. It's so sad, the corruption.
That's exactly the way it is there. I found that.
They're looking down at us.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's right. But anyway, it was
people complain here, and they don't understand corruption.
No, absolutely. And I'm telling you, it feels really good to get back. Mm-hmm. It really feels good. It feels safe here. I feel safe.
Yeah. Well, when the old ladies want to push you off a cliff, for God's
That's right. I told that story on your show, but meeting this group of people with dogs, my dog was playing with their dog and stuff like that. I don't speak any Russian, and this woman was very upset that I was there. And when I walked away and took a picture of everyone in a group, she was dead serious. She wanted to push me off the cliff and wanted to kill me. And every time they ran into each other a bunch of times, and, every single time she said, I really would love to kill him.
Wow, that is really wild. And, I haven't met a Russian here in the States, even the ones with accents. In New York, there's a lot of Russians. Or sometimes when you go and there's tourists and they don't even speak English. In Colorado, there is actually quite a few. And, I don't want to hurt them or kill them. Some of them are a lot of fun to hang out with.
Oh, I really enjoy the culture.
Well, what was funny is, in Colorado, I lived in an apartment complex years ago, and there were some Russians that lived in it. It was kind of a neighborhood where there were Russians. And my thought was, at least when it came to the girls, how do I try to date one of these girls that doesn't speak English? But certainly I didn't want to kill any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sort of a bipolar situation. It was like, oh, you're an American? Oh, wow. There was that, too.
Oh, good. So there were some people who wanted to...
Yes.
Who were very happy and spoke and were nice.
They said, I want to go to America. I want to live to America. This one woman wanted me to marry her.
Wow.
Yeah, so I wish I was joking.
So did your girlfriend get in a fight with her?
No, she basically said, go right ahead.
Okay, wow.
So anyway, it's good to be back and in one piece. And,
cool.
Yeah. But anyway, what's going on with the UFO news this week?
UFO news, I guess we ought to get to that. Yeah, some interesting things, a few interesting videos, and actually, all the stories I'm going to be doing is Roger Marsh, because I've gotten so busy with MUFON and with the Congress. There's got a lot going on with that, our UFO Congress, which is in February. However, and I can tell people right now, today is the last day to get the super early bird special. So you get a huge discount if you go register today. For the UFO Congress, and the speakers list is awesome, but that's been a lot of work. But Roger's been posting some really good stuff. I challenged him to, go through those MUFON files and look for some good videos. And I think he's found some good stuff. However, this first one I want to talk to you about is not a UFO video. However, it's interesting because it's this elaborate kind of drawing that this witness had made of what she and her boyfriend believed they had seen at about 11 p.m. at night, a large triangular craft with red and blue lights below it. White lights ran along the rim of two sides of this triangle. And what's interesting is that they saw this in Livermore, California, which, of course, is the home of the famous Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, right, which is kind of where they do a lot of top-secret work. But they saw this at about 11 p.m. on September 14th. They were driving on the highway when they just noticed these lights. They kept looking at it for a while until they both couldn't realize what it was. They thought perhaps, and they noticed it was this large triangular craft, they say. So that's a really interesting report. It just kind of blinked out and disappeared.
Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to drive by, when I was out in California, used to drive by that lab. I remember it was always very hot. Really? Very, very hot there. For some reason, it was miserably hot.
Wow, that's weird.
Yeah, it's just one of those inland areas.
What if it's ran by reptilians and they like to keep it hot?
I think that's what it is. Huh? Yeah.
Okay, there we go. We figured it out.
Yeah, that's quick.
The other one's one from North Carolina, and what this guy said he saw a star-like object moving slowly from the south to the north. That normally would not sound so mysterious. This was about 9 p.m. on June 26th of this year. But he said that it moved in one direction slowly, and then it turned around and moved the other direction. And he's got a video of it, and it's hard to tell, but in the video, it looks like this light does exactly what he says, that it's moving slowly in one direction and then moves back. Now, he does pick up the camera and move. So it could be that it's the movement of the camera and not the object, and it could have been a star. But I think he said otherwise he saw it move in a zigzag motion and then disappear. So, and what's interesting is in Colorado I've seen something like that. However, during the day. I used to be really skeptical, and I got to say, I don't know what's going on with alien abductions or whatever. This girl had said she was abducted by aliens, but we started hanging out, and we became good friends. And she at first would ask me, why don't you come hang out, and I'll show you that I see these little orb things. And so we were hanging out. I thought it'd be sitting outside for a while, but we're just in her house hanging out for a while. And she would say, let's go outside. And she would just want to go for a couple minutes because she kind of sensed something. And, one of these times off in the distance, there was this little light. And it just sat there during the day.
Wow.
For a while. Then it moved to the right really slowly. Then it moved to the left. And then it just faded out. Kind of like what this thing's doing. So, really interesting video there. However, the most interesting video we've had in a while is, at least since you've been gone, is this one in Houston that Roger just posted today. This is another MUFON case. All of these are. But this one's from March 30th, and it was taken at 2:30 a.m. This witness says that they were outside when they saw a strange object that to them looked metallic gray and spherical. However, in the video is weird. It almost looks like the camera is kind of a bad camera, and it's making some kind of weird kind of effect. But at one point, he zoomed out where you see the lights of the city and a street light and a light, out there in the distance. And when he zooms in on this light, it's actually kind of like multiple lights, moving around. It's so weird. It is a really weird video. I can't make heads or tail of this thing. It was investigated by the Texas State Section Director, Arthur Goodrich, and he closed it as an unknown in May. But, yeah, it's a really weird video. I don't know what the heck's going on here.
So one more thing before we close out the news here. What do you think about this NASA's report on salt water on Mars? It's pretty interesting, huh?
Yeah, I think that my stepdad's not going to be able to get out of this one because we have a long-standing bet. I bet him probably 10 years ago, if not longer, that there would be standing water on Mars. Just because we started getting good pictures. I even went to a lecture with the guy who heads JPL. I can't remember his name, at the museum in Denver. And he felt that way, too. And, actually, I just said water on Mars. And when they found it in the atmosphere, my stepdad was like, oh, no. And he kept adding to it. And then finally he said, standing water on Mars. And now they've found evidence of it. So I think it's awesome. I think it's really interesting. I think that there have been lots of features that show that it's certainly a possibility. So it's cool that they've been able to confirm it. And I think people have to remember that when it comes to NASA, a lot of people say, oh, duh, like Ridley Scott said, I knew that a long time ago. But, with NASA, they're very careful and they want to prove it before they announce it. They just don't want to speculate, which is all it is prior to that. So that's why NASA is late in the game. But when they say it, you can be pretty sure it's been confirmed. So it's another step. Hopefully now they send a rover, or hopefully we'll see what happens next. But again, it's just like, a lot of us, like we've talked about, we feel like we're on the precipice of, even microbial life being discovered elsewhere, and we're just inching closer and closer to it. So it's very, very, very exciting, I think.
Yes. I just want to know, how much did you bet?
Well, I don't want to disclose it. It's a good amount of money.
Oh,
it is actually a large amount of money. However, over the years, he's probably spent, 100-fold on me. Well, so there's no way I could, in good conscience, go collect from him. But bragging rights are plenty good for me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Hey, you know what? On the way back from Russia, I watched the movie Contact. Now, I haven't seen it since it came out. And, boy, that was really good to watch that movie after being involved in this show and talking to all these people. Some of the things that were said in the show are things that some of the people have quoted on, some of the guests have quoted. For instance, Jeffrey Bennett says that his colleagues and himself say that if a civilization can go through a bit of high technology without destroying themselves, they'll eventually travel the stars. And that was more or less said in that movie. A lot of things, like I said.
Well, Carl Sagan feels the same way. He felt that if there are advanced civilizations out there, that they would be most likely have overcome social problems as well. So, yeah, he felt like that the entire time. And so do many of the SETI scientists. Of course, there's more stories out today about how Stephen Hawking does not feel the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he has a right to have his own opinion, right?
Right.
Yeah, whether we agree or not. But
right.
Anyway, you have a good one, sir, and we'll be talking to you next week.
You too. We'll talk to you soon. Happy to have you back in the States, safe and sound.
Thank you.
And your Chihuahua, I'm sure.
Yes, my Chihuahua has no jet lag, but I do.
Good.
So anyway, hang in, everyone. We'll be right back. We have some new music by Kerry Lloyd Whitehouse. He dedicated an entire album to our past astronomer who passed away recently, Andy Fleming. So here's a clip from Kerry Lloyd Whitehouse, and we'll be right back with John Alexander.
Evening.
Hello, John. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you much.
Yes, John. So I have been wanting to get you on the show for a long time. Could you pull up a little closer to your phone, please? The producer of the show
said.
Can't get
any closer.
No. Okay. All right. So, John, for the person that is not aware of your background, I'd like to go over your military career and how you got fascinated into with the UFO topic and other paranormal topics and other things that you've actually had an open mind enough to look into. I think it's all fascinating. And I also, in the second hour, we'll talk about Skinwalker Ranch. You're one of the people that were actually on site there doing some research. I'd like to talk about that. And so let's get started with your background, if you would.
Well, you've got that posted. I was in the military for 32 years. Second career was Los Alamos National Laboratory. And came over here, worked part-time with Bob Bigelow with the National Institute of Discovery Science. spent about 10 years as a senior fellow with the Joint Special Operations University. We sit back and write interesting material and monographs and think about strategic issues. So.
And so in your military career, when you were in the Army, at that time, did you have a fascination with UFOs?
Well, I started that when I was 10 years old. So, yeah, it always sort of continued there. So.
Oh, how did that come about at 10 years old?
Well, I just when Ken Arnold's sighting came out and all hullabaloo was going up at that time, it definitely got my attention. I remember I went to a very unusual grade school that had an internal radio system, and the students would give little vignettes over the school radio, and I remember that was one of the topics that I chose to talk about. That was 1947.
Wow, that's amazing. I grew up in Maine, basically, where I'm at now, and I remember there was a flap, they called it the New England flap, but that's what they call it now, but back then it just seemed like there was a lot of UFOs happening at that time. And so I sort of had an interest in it, but I had never seen anything until, just a number of years ago. But before that, I always had like some type, a little bit of a fascination and definitely an open mind about it. Now, you have, one of the things I do want to talk about is, you've ruffled a lot of feathers here and there in the UFO field, because I think you're someone that says it the way it is a lot of times. And since you've been at this so long, I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes, and you've had a lot of connections, too. I saw that you were friends with, was it Hal Puthoff? Is that one of the people?
Oh, yeah, I've known Hal for decades.
Yeah, interesting man right there. And also you knew John Mack, all kinds of people. So as far as being getting involved in the field itself, when did that start?
Well, I guess in 1947. Like I said, started with an individual interest. I don't know. I mean, I know what you're looking for. Just the interest has always been there, and I've taken advantage of the various situations to be able to explore the topics. And as you know, I did. This is the main topic of the book, of course, is that I had put together a internal study group to look into the field. And I guess where the feathers get ruffled is that what we found was certainly not what we expected. We expected pretty much what the popular folklore says, I ended up, as I mentioned there, talking to many, many very senior people. It gets a little complex in that I do think there are people, in the government who are interested. And I think one of the biggest problems is that people assume that the government is some big monolithic entity that everybody thinks alike. The thing I find most fascinating is the dichotomy that basically we think that the government's totally incompetent, except for UFOs, where they're omniscient. So,
that's a really good point. Now, did I see a documentary? It could have been you in it that was actually trying to see how deeply you could go into the government to see if there was anything hidden. Was that you?
I don't know about what the documentary would be. I'd have to know. I mean, I've been on a number of shows, of course.
Uh-huh.
but...
So did you do research, let me put it this way, did you do research to see if you could find any links of the government conspiracy on UFOs?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was running a top-secret level group that we explored this and went in assuming that was in fact the case. I have come to kind of different conclusions now, but we certainly looked into it in considerable depth.
Uh-huh. And because you hear a lot of, a lot of speculation, like you said earlier, but also you hear speculation that there's one small part of the government that, as time goes on, going back to, like, say, 1947, there was one small part of the government that was keeping their eyes on, the UFO subject, mm-hmm. and then there was Project Blue Book, and before that, the other two organizations, as far as the Air Force goes, Project Sign, and what's the other one? I just can't think of it. Okay, yeah. So, would you disagree with that statement that there's? Do you think that at this time there's no part of the government or Air Force or NORAD or anything like that that has any interest in UFOs, or do you think they're monitored? Because
I think there are people. Remember, we're talking about very, very large institutions, and that what we know is that the adult population, somewhere between 7 and 10% of the people, have actually seen UFOs. So that number applies to people in the government as well. So I'm sure there are people who, have interest. Now, I mean, you started laying out some timelines, and you realize the people that are in the government now weren't even born mm-hmm. When all this started. So you've mm-hmm. got to be talking about groups that change over with a fair degree of regularity. And, I just have a problem. I am sure there are people who are interested and, follow up to some degree. What I'm not sure of is, I don't see any massive cover-up. I mean, I've given talks to say I have good news and bad news. And government, the good news is the government's been telling you the truth. And the bad news is the government's been telling you the truth. The reality is, from an institutional perspective, really don't care. I mean, people don't understand that. And the problem is that the UFO community, such as it is totally incestuous and myopic. And they believe that this is, biggest thing since sex and sliced bread. Reality is there's wars going on, and most of the emphasis is on that sort of effort.
Well, all right. Let's look at there must be a part of the government that sort of is similar to this topic.
Why?
Because let's just say that there must be some part of something. I'm trying to do a parallel here with what would go through time being passed down to other people, like you mentioned earlier, that people weren't even born, when Roswell happened. But I'm just saying there's parts of the government that are kept, top secret.
Which part is that?
No, I'm saying there are parts of the government that's kept top secret.
I know, and I'm asking which part is it?
I'm not being specific. I'm just saying that.
Well, I know, and that is the problem. And this is, like one of the largest chapters in the book is people just do not understand how the government works. And again, you get back to this dichotomy of, being incompetent to handle anything. Certainly not going to handle health care and,
All right, well, let's just say
the government's incompetent. except for this little tiny niche.
All right, well, they're not going to share their secrets on how they made a nuclear bomb. Let's just say that. Okay, that was in the 1940s. What's that?
We have.
So I'm not going to be able to come up with a good example, it sounds like.
Pick one. Stealth is a good example. I mean, all of these things. In fact, when I worked, remember, Los Alamos, my second career was the place that brought you the bomb. I had a friend who was very high. He had to wait a long time to get clearances, and so he was a nuclear physicist, and this would have been 70s to early 80s, and they said, okay, while you're waiting for your clearance, figure out how to make a nuclear bomb from open source literature. And this was before the days of the internet, and was able to do it. So those secrets are out there, and that is one of the problems. That most of this information is just totally available.
Well, why wouldn't, let's just say that there are a lot of sightings. There's a lot of,
absolutely.
Out of those sightings, there's a lot of unexplainable sightings.
Sure.
And so why wouldn't the government have an interest in that?
Because the government does not have a Department of Good Ideas. and that's sort of what we think of. And this is very serious stuff. This is a total lack of understanding. And, like Deep Throat said, follow the money. So you look at the money trail and you say, how does that system work? By the way, this is mystifying to people in the government as well. But basically, you do what we call rack and stack. You line up all of the things that you're required to take care of, and then you allocate your funds against that. And the problem is that in all cases, you run out of money long before you run out of things that you really ought to be exploring. Do UFO things occur? But I'm going to counter and say, there are miracles that go on a continuous basis. And yet, for some reason, the UFO community thinks the government ought to be involved in this. Why, on the same wavelength, would they not be responsible for investigating miracles that happen all the time? We have no expectation of that.
Well, I think that miracles are, as you say, that can't be explained. Yes, they can really be something, but if it actually comes to a possibility of, say, extraterrestrials visiting us, I'm not saying, because I really don't know, but let's just say.
Why not? I mean, we talked about, there have been, this is a very important issue, and one that I address, and the community doesn't like it. But the point is, we have had reports of contact between sentient non-human beings and humans throughout the entirety of human history. This shows up in, mythology, folklore, in basically every country in the world. And yet we do not expect the government to be interested in that. And that may well be, one of my early slides in all briefings that I get now is that I take, and UFOs are a small piece, I've been involved with psychokinesis, remote viewing, near-death studies, poltergeist, firewalking, you name it. I am personally convinced that there is some linkage between all of those things. But we tend to, and one of the big problems in understanding or coming to a theoretical basis for understanding these phenomena is everybody wants the stovepipe. In other words, I'm going to talk about UFOs. I'm going to challenge you and say, what do you mean by a UFO? You can't even come up with a viable definition. My point is that I got little balls of light that are floating around. I've got huge craft with veridical evidence of things more than a mile across, maybe considerably more than that, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. So which ones are UFOs and which ones aren't? We don't even know what we're studying.
Yeah, I say that a lot. I've said that quite a bit on this show. Like, it's whatever it is, it could be something we haven't even thought of. You know what I mean? Or
the first paragraph or the first sentence in the book that I wrote was UFOs are real. And by that, I mean very physical, tangible, vehicles that are out there. But I end by saying, whatever this is, it is more complex than we ever imagined, and maybe than we can imagine. And I argue we're not at the point of asking the right questions, much less coming up with answers.
Okay, up on the chat room, let's see, there's no doubt that the government and military has proof of these unexplained craft that show up on radar. So the government wouldn't be doing their job seriously. Well, he keeps going on. If what I tell these folks is, okay, you are now the manager of whatever this organization is. You have a finite budget. How much of that budget do you want to expend on something that you have a very low probability of resolving? That's always the case, and I think that's a lot of the times why the science community won't look into this, because of the issue of actually solving it. Well,
no, the scientific community is a different issue, and I tend to blame Condon here. I did a whole chapter on Condon as well, and it's interesting because, in fact, Condon was right to a degree, but people don't realize the question to Condon was not, are UFOs real? It was, are UFOs a threat? And he said, no threat, haven't been invaded, so that's probably fairly accurate. The problem was that he then went on to say, and there's no scientific value in this. The other problem is that there's a perception in the general scientific very thorough study when it was not. It was a very cursory study. The Air Force had trouble, locating who was willing to even do the study. Condon was far from the first choice. But he was the only one at the University of Colorado who would step up and say, we'll even participate.
Right. Yeah. And now, I think I spoke about this a while back, where if someone went against what the path that he was going on, they were basically bumped out, or a couple of people were. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah. Now, I just want to say...
And they wrote books to that effect, too. I mean, the problem, the Condon report itself is not that bad, because if you read it, it basically says internally that there are a number of pretty damn good cases. The problem was that Condon, who did not investigate any of the cases, wrote the recommendations and conclusions. And he concluded, that there was nothing to it, when in fact the body of the report disagrees. It's internally incongruent.
Wow. Okay. And you hear a lot of people will quote the Condon report as if it's it's basically the Bible, and I know it's the reason, or what was used when they shut down Project Blue Book. That
was the answer that the Air Force wanted. Mm-hmm. That was a put-up job. The Air Force did not want to bother with UFOs. Just make this go away. And the Condon report was designed to get that answer, and they were successful. It basically went away.
Now, one of the things that I am kind of curious about, and that is a lot of the reports, and actually I have a friend that actually saw this. He saw a disc being chased by two jets, military jets. And that is something you do hear about. And what do you think happens when something like that? I know I'm going a little skipping around here a little bit, but what do you think happens?
Well, we know know that there have been continued sightings. The problem is that, and again, this is where the UFO community, I think, makes a mistake. I can list a number of really critical incidents. Bent waters would be tops on the list. There's the Malmstrom base in the book. I go into the ones in the former Soviet Union where you had, really significant interactions with strategic systems. And so the unwashed generally say, well, see, therefore it must be important. Well, the idea was that, studies were in fact done, but did not come up with an answer. Now, when I take all of these critical incidents and I amortize them over, we talked about 60, 70 years, and a world, they get pretty rare when you have, I'm not talking about, somebody taking a quick picture or something like that, but actual, interactions, they're pretty damn rare events, in fact.
If you're listening live out there, you can jump in our chat room, and that's at podcastufo.com. If you'd like to call and ask Dr. John Alexander a question, the phone number is 603-967-4030. I noticed your email address and that you had this non-lethal weapon, and we have a question up on the message board, so we're going to skip to that for right now, if that's all right. And they want to know, the non-lethal microwave weapons deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq on the back of Jeeps. Was this technology based on UFO encounters? What's that?
It was deployed on what?
This is a question that's up there. It says on Afghanistan and Iraq on the back of Jeeps. Is that what this technology is?
No such thing.
Okay. All right.
The best we had were, the VMADs, which became the active denial system, or ADS, is what came along. You're talking about what's colloquially known as the pain ray. This is a microwave weapon. It's really quite big. You see it on Humvees. That's highly optimistic. But what it does is it puts out a beam at 93 gigahertz. It will hit the skin, penetrates just a few millimeters, but hits the pain centers and makes you want to go away very quickly. I've been shot by that, and most of these non-lethal weapons.
That seems like it would be really good.
They've been deployed.
That seems like that would be really good in the issues they have with pirating, open seas pirates.
Well, the problem there, and we looked at this, and was really the National Academy of Science was doing a study on it for the Navy after the Cole incident, and power becomes the main issue. You need someplace to put the power, and the ships, by and large, were not willing to make the trade-off in what you need to relinquish in cubic footage for the advantage that you might get. Now, we keep exploring these things. My last job in the military was a director of advanced systems concepts at Army Laboratory Command, and I had all of the tactical directed energy, which included lasers and high-power microwaves and that sort of thing. And, there's been some advances, but, I have admonished some briefers since then when they get up and they give these future concepts briefing. And I asked them, I said, what are you talking about? Because I gave this same briefing, 25 years ago. And, here you are talking about it hundreds of millions of dollars later. And, yes, there's been some improvement, but have not seen any breakthrough technology come along.
Question up on the message board. Could you, let's see, someone wants me to ask if evidence of government knowledge of UFOs lies in following the money trail, as you say. how can Rumsfeld announce $2.3 trillion missing from the federal budget? Where does that money trail go?
Nonsense. That money, we don't have that money missing, and there's no big pots out there. Yeah, you can slap around at a few $1 million. But that's a popular thing. As a matter of fact, Rumsfeld, just before 9/11, he was about to take on, the military-industrial complex and wanted to really ding the contractors, and had come up with a $1 trillion figure. There's no such money missing, as they say. Are there black budgets? Yes. What folks don't realize, and again, you get back to lack of understanding of the government, is that there are people who oversee black projects. The money is finite, and particularly research and development has been cut severely because of the ongoing wars. And while, the money is finite, there's fierce internal competition, even within what you would call the black world, for money. And if you got crazy ideas, you're probably not going to come out with a lot of money. As I said, particularly in the extremely lean budgetary constraints that we've had, further exacerbated by sequester that has really, really hurt all R&D.
I want to go back. You stand pretty strong that you don't think the government is
I'm going to back up again.
Sure.
What government? What is the government? It is not.
All right.
I used to say when I was in the Pentagon, I used to run around, say, where's this guy Pentagon? Because they'll have all these things of the Pentagon says this and the Pentagon says that. The Pentagon doesn't say anything. It's a big stone building. But there are people in there who make pronouncements. So, again, we're back to this omniscience on UFOs and totally incompetent and everything else. But it's the same people.
Okay. All right. Let's just say DARPA or some part of the military. I would think that if something is in our skies, and they know that something's in our skies, but they don't know what it is. But the thing that gets me is I would just think that there would be someone really paying attention to that.
If you're lucky, you might get some individuals who want to pay attention, but that's not going to be any big effort. Again, you're back to, remember, we have been at war constantly since 2001. Mm-hmm. Spent about $3 trillion in that. So what is it that you want them to pay attention to that's different from, the war effort? You keep hearing you haven't gone to reverse engineering, but I should think that's a topic that will come up. And you go, no, wait a minute, let's look at the technological advances that we've seen. And conflict or war does tend to bring out technological advances. The best we've seen is the F-35, and people are worried now about the damn thing can't fight after the billions and billions of dollars that have been, put into that effort. So you don't see anything, where you see a really big leap in technology. And again, you get back to where do you want to apply your resources? It's a zero-sum game. Maybe you want to keep a finger in there of somebody, but primarily probably on personal interest. And I'm sure, as I said, there are people inside the government who have seen unusual sorts of things, and we acknowledge that they're there. The problem is when you have researched them, and we can go off on the Bentwaters, that's one of the, I think one of the best cases, and you still end up with have no idea what it was. But something certainly happened there.
Yeah. Someone on the message board wants you to describe the government. What's your description of the government?
I'm not even going to play with that. Tell them Google U.S. government, and it'll tell you the three branches and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things they don't understand is that let's deal with the people in the government. First of all, their primary interest is retaining their jobs. This is certainly true in the legislative and generally in the executive branch as well. So your primary focus is on maintaining your job. The government has organizations. Each organization has very specific job descriptions as to what they're responsible for, very strict laws on how money is spent, etc. It's split between the executive branch, which is, controlling most of the agencies you're talking about, and the legislative branch, which controls the purse strings.
Well, let me ask you this. How important do you think UFOs are in finding out what they are?
I think to the UFO community, very important. To average person, it's a ho-hum. In fact, that's one of the things that's interesting. Probably 70% of the population believe in UFOs, but you ask them, if you go out and ask them, so how much of your tax dollar would you like spent on this, or would you be willing to have taxes increased to study it? The answer is a solid no.
I have to agree with you on that, I think that most people, unlike people that are listening to the show and myself, are busy with their lives and never even really contemplate what's going on in the universe, or it just doesn't affect them, or they seemingly doesn't affect them. And
we have wars going on that do not affect the American public in general, other than they pay a lot of money for it. And that's one of the travesties. It's you've mentioned Iraq and Afghanistan. I did make Afghanistan early on, but less than 1% of the American population is affected, by these conflicts. And so it's just totally disconnected. Similarly, in the UFO, unfortunately, it's a very incestuous community, and they drink their own bathwater and believe their press clippings, and start believing this and believing it's a big deal. When you go, the question I have there is compared to what? Compared to war or terrorism or the healthcare system or what? It just doesn't make the cut.
Well, I see that you are friends with John Mack, and so what do you think about the abduction side of this whole thing?
Very mixed. John was a great guy, good friend. Unfortunately, met an untimely demise in UK. Again, I'll step back to what I mentioned before. Interactions between humans and sentient non-humans, including things that sound a lot like abductions. The issue there is that the UFO abduction is a fairly new wrinkle to a very old story. I think things happen. Understand that. But let's understand, some of these incidents are certainly real. So I'm not suggesting at all that it's not real. But I'm not convinced that, those little gray guys from Zeta Reticuli, coming down to snatch folks up.
Now, have you ever really personally investigated any cases at all? You mentioned Bentwaters a couple of times. Is that something? Is that a case that you really looked into deeply?
Well, I have talked to most of the principals on that, yes. And I think it's one of the strongest ones. You end up with about 60 identifiable witnesses, most of them in the PRP. You have the physical evidence, and I've certainly seen the plaster casts and the recordings and When I first talked to Jim Pennison, and he goes, "Oh, you mean the one I touched?" Yeah, I believe he walked up and touched something. So, and more data, have come out. I think they recently found radar corroboration that something was in the area. By the way, that gets to some of the most interesting technical aspects about UFOs, is that you have them on radar moving very, very fast, making, high-speed turns that are basically, it would be physically impossible to survive. Yet these things happen. And at other times, you've got sightings of things where you have, visible confirmation and no correlating radar, even though you would expect them to have such. This gets back to the bottom line, is that it is terribly, terribly complex, whatever we're dealing with.
Now, the one thing about the Rendlesham Force incident is that there's a lot of controversy between people involved. I had Charles Hult. I met him, and he was on this show with John Burroughs. There's a lot of conflicts between a number of the people in that.
It seems to be more personal, personality driven. I've known Chuck for years. I happen to think he's pretty straightforward on it. They know Pennison, talked to Burroughs, talked to a number of others that were more on the side. This was, again, the UFO community thinks that this was a good deal for Chuck. Got him promoted, when in fact it was, it almost got him derailed. He was already on the fast track to colonel. And this, being associated with UFOs in the military is generally not a good thing. And he will tell you that a number of his people suffered from a career perspective, just because of any, relationship to the incident.
What would you say to the skeptic out there? You hear about, the lighthouse, it was just a lighthouse lights.
Oh, that's total nonsense.
Yeah.
And one of the things they did show, I forget, there was one program that was done where they took the people back there and they went to the actual site, and what they said is, you cannot see the lighthouse from where the incident took place. Periodicity notwithstanding on the light. But the lighthouse certainly didn't come up and, put dents in the ground and radiation in the background. Another thing that's not as well known about the case is we talk about it as 2 or 3 incidents that happened in December of 1980. Reality is, weird stuff happened in that area kind of forever, and has even continued after the base closed.
Right.
So we tend to try to, this is the problem with studying, when you try to isolate, specific aspects of it and not look at it in the larger context.
That's right. I believe when I spoke with Chuck, he mentioned that things were actually, there was a sighting actually, I think, last year at some point, still going on there.
It continues, and there was weird stuff going on. Even weirder things were going on kind of all along, and it was far more than just the 2 or 3 incidents that get written about.
Right. Okay, that's it for the first hour, and hang in for this quick music break. We'll be right back to hear John talk about Roswell, Skinwalker Ranch, and more. If you're listening this far, you're a supporter, and I want to thank you. By the way, the music for this show is created by Kerry Lloyd Whitehouse. He's in Ireland. He makes music for several movies, some blockbuster movies as well, and he created an album, dedicated it to our past astronomer who passed away recently, Andy Fleming. And so there's a banner up on Podcast UFO on the sidebar, and he said, anyone can download that music. It's for free. You can have it. So that's right on our website. And thank you, Kerry, for that. All right. So, John, getting back to, I guess we're pretty much done on Rendlesham Forest. I too think it's truly in the top 5 cases that I can think of. And now I understand, and I know there's going to be some, as Michael, who filled in for me last week, said there's going to be some heads exploding. But I understand you don't have a lot of faith in the Roswell incident.
Well, the problem with Roswell is the pieces never all quite fit. I do tend to come down against Roswell. Having said that, I've got some friends that I highly respect who say that I'm wrong. I happen to think that it probably was something of ours. I was kind of surprised. It was actually one of the programs that Bill Burns did and brought in when Jesse Jr. was still alive, and there was another sergeant. They put out several thin films and asked them to come in and say, do you see the material here that you had handled years before? And I absolutely think that, A, something did happen, and that Jesse Jr. was absolutely straight arrow on one of the few people who said exactly what he knew and didn't extrapolate. But they both went in and pointed to, the same material, and it did exist at that time, and it was exactly what was needed for the mission that was described. So,
are you talking about the mogul?
Well, something similar to that, yeah.
So there's things don't when someone is taking apart the Roswell case, there's some things that don't fit either, and that is, first of all, I've heard different people's ideas on why the Army Air Force would say that they recovered a disc. So first of all, let's hear what your thoughts are on why they would say that.
They said they had the material as opposed to a disc. And remember, at the time, this is one of the things that's interesting. Roswell was not a big deal in 1947. It wasn't until more than Berlitz came forward with books, 20 years later, that it picked up steam again. I had people, again, that I highly respect who knew about the project. The material that was picked up is exactly what was needed. There's an interesting web, I'm trying to think of the guy's name now. There's a professor at UC Berkeley who was involved in those days and describes this in exquisite detail. One of the things I learned from the process that I hadn't heard was that you got to remember the context. This was the bad old days. 47, we had popped hydrogen bombs. Nobody else had, but we knew the Soviet Union was about to do so. Once that happened, it was an absolute game changer from a geopolitical standpoint. And so knowing when they, touched off the first nuke was absolutely critical. There were some things that were learned from World War II. This is a piece that I hadn't heard about pilots flying over the Pacific were given little balls. They said if you get shot down, what you do is you pull the pin on this thing and drop it into the ocean. If you haven't been picked up in 3 days, pull the pin, drop the second one. And it turns out there were certain acoustic channels that were in the water, and so what we would do is go and park submarines in strategic areas near where the flight pattern was going to be, and they would hear the ping, go up and pick up the pilot. Well, it turns out the same things occur in the stratosphere, and what they were doing was taking advantage of that. Now, later, our seismic sensors became much more sophisticated and able to do the sighting, and we went to, relying on seismic sensors as opposed to high-altitude acoustic sensors. But the material it needed had to be certain size, shape, and whatnot, and a lot of folks aren't aware, but between 60 and 80,000 feet, there's horrendous crosswinds. And so what you needed was material that could withstand deformation and return to its original configuration, and that's exactly the material that was picked up.
Well, if that's the case, why would so many, well, there's a couple of things. Why would so many people make such a big deal about it, and why would they pick up every...
Well, they didn't. My point was they didn't. Nobody made a big deal of this until many years later.
All right. So many years later, people are saying they never saw anything like, say, the material that they crunched up in their hands. And...
Oh, they did. The people that we know had their hands on it, did say, this is either what I saw or very similar to it.
Okay. We have a lot of people typing madly on the chat room that I can't
Roswell
keep up with.
Gets me in trouble.
Yeah, but anyone is welcome on the chat room, because I'm not going to be able to read your questions. You're going so fast there. Please call in at 603-967-4030 and have a discussion with Dr. John Alexander about Roswell, if you'd like, while we're talking about it. One of the things that also comes to mind is, why would they fly the material to Wright in the first place? Why would it be that important if the material was conventional to other weather balloons and other radar?
No. Not conventional. This is ultra sensitive. One of the things where I totally disagree with Jesse Marcel Sr., in his interviews, he said he was the G2, or the intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield, and therefore he knew everything that was going on. That is just utter nonsense. This was, you talk about above top secret. Remember, we were talking about looking for the potential game changer in all of the existing geopolitical situation at the time. No, they didn't know. And I do think that one of the things that comes up is the material being switched at Fort Worth, and I think that's absolutely what happened. And the reason was that by this time people were onto what had happened, and that they knew that the Soviets would be watching television and did not want them to see what the real material was. So I'm convinced that a switch did take place.
Wasn't there these mogul balloons, weren't they pictured in newspapers?
Not then, no. That didn't come along until many, many years later.
All right, well, let's talk about the people, the witnesses, that there's like Kevin Randall, who I actually respect him a lot. I think he's a very good...
Yeah, I know Kevin. We agree to disagree. We can have, like with Stan Friedman, and I know you had on, we have respectable, disagreement on, the facts. And I know he's interviewed a lot of people. It is interesting how many of them did not come forward until, like I say, many, many years later.
Well,
by the way, one of the things I do think is important, I do believe that, A, an incident happened, and B, that the cover-up was very heavy-handed. And when the folks went in and absolutely were threatened. Of course, I was at Los Alamos when Hazel O'Leary started Truth and Reconciliation, and there, like every, all of the interviews started with, it was a different time. And I think one of the problems, not sure how old you are, but if you remember Duck and Cover and these sorts of things, people today have no concept of what the Cold War was like. I mean, we honestly believe that, there was an impending nuclear strike coming at any minute. And it really was a totally different time in the world. Hard to imagine in today's environment.
Yeah, I remember hiding under my desk. That was one of the things we had to do, is crawl under our desk like we'd be saved from a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Under the desk.
Boy, that would have done a lot of good.
Yeah. So, all right. I had a train of thought here as far as so the material was flown. What about the people, the many people, and you just said right there that there was a heavy-handed threats going on there. So maybe that's why people didn't talk about it for years and they felt more comfortable 30.
Well, it did, and there were very few of these are firsthand. Almost all of them are secondhand witnesses at best.
And what about the bodies? Do you think that was all the different people that...
I do not believe the bodies, and I've been told by friends that I respect that that's wrong, but I don't see bodies. They didn't enter the picture until much later, and the whole mortuary story and all of that. And
the geological college group that supposedly...
Right. Yeah, these new groups kept popping up, but it was, you didn't hear any of that early on.
Well, one of the things I think is something that shouldn't be discounted quickly is the woman in Florida that had the deathbed. Basically, she was on her deathbed and said, she wanted to talk to her hospice worker or whoever it was about seeing the bodies and being part of that group and keeping it quiet all those years. To me, that's...
I have no data on that.
That's... I can't remember if it was... I don't think it was Kevin Randall I spoke to, but I believe it might have been the other people involved in that. So if you're on the message board, it's going pretty fast here. So if anyone wants a specific question, please type it as a question, and I'll pass it along we're listening right now to John Alexander, and the phone line is open. No one's dared to call you, John. And it's 603-967-4030.
Yeah, we bite.
So, all right, Roswell, I think myself, I'm on the other side of the fence from you. I just think there's too many things. I know a lot of times, like, a myth will become fact because it's carried on and retold many times. For instance, Alexander the Great, let's just say Alexander the Great had a UFO sighting. Well, right. You look back, there's no other... You go before 1959, before a book was written about that, and there's absolutely nothing out there. So I understand how these myths can get carried on, and there is a lot of myth that has kind of coagulated with Roswell. And, people, dressing up.
I actually wrote to that issue, and I forget, it was published in UFO Reporter or I'd have to look up and see where it was published. But in all phenomena, one of the things that I have found, I developed a whole model based on this, and what you start with, like with Roswell, Ken Arnold. And 47, you got a few sightings, and then you go forward and you get more and more sightings. Then you do some studies, and then you go forward in time and you do studies, and then you do studies of studies and try to aggregate. And then at some point in time, you do a historical perspective. And the problem with a historical perspective is when you reach back, you find out the phenomena was there long before you thought it was. It just wasn't recognized as such. I mean, there are plenty. Jacques Vallée did a book fairly recently, and I mean, they went back 3,000 years, and of sightings, and yet everybody wants to start. The modern mythology, if you will, starts with Ken Arnold in summer 47.
Yes. I actually I had a little bit of a debate with Dr. Seth Shostak from SETI. And, I always say his name wrong. And he said the UFO phenomenon started in 1947. That's just, his belief. A lot of people believe that, that's it. And so
SETI would be scared to death if they turned up anything real. I know what they say, but I think the difference is what they say. It would just scare the crap out of them.
Are you saying a signal? Is that what you're saying? Or
the SETI program. I mean, it is basically designed for failure.
I have to agree with you on that for the most part, because of what they're listening for could be ancient technology to an advanced civilization.
I had Edward Teller, and we talked about it, and said, A, they're looking in the wrong place, and B, it's like, looking at basically using a straw to explore the universe. And the problem, I give, I don't know if we're going to get into the other topics I've been involved with, but, I have hard evidence of various phenomena that have occurred in other domains, other parts of the world. And the evidence in favor, physical evidence supporting these phenomena are just overwhelming. A friend of mine said if psi was a crime, it would be convicted. You could stand up in a court of law. But we tend to just not look at the evidence. There's some interesting articles that came out this week, and it was designed primarily to talk about the elections and political things, but how our brains are literally skewed in favor of emotion and preconceived ideas over accepting facts, particularly if facts radically disagree with the preconception.
What you just said there a minute ago about overwhelming evidence, do you want to give a couple of examples of what you're talking about?
Well, which phenomena do you want? I've been in near-death studies. I think continuation of consciousness beyond physical death is, all but proven. Some of the things that I'm dealing with, I was in Togo and Benin in West Africa and saw things in voodoo ceremonies that I've got on videotape that I'm not publishing because I've never seen anything like it, but where guys are standing in fire, sitting in fire, eating fire, holding it in their mouth, and you watch it glow as they inhale and exhale. So it's definitely there for holding it there for a minute. I've had that examined by magicians and just said, no way. There's no tricks involved.
Wow.
And I have seen, we've visited shamans all over the world. I've seen various kinds of phenomena. One of the things I point out is that I do work in Brazil periodically, and often in the non-lethal weapons area. But the point there is that in dealing with the intelligentsia, highly educated Western systems, their belief system totally accommodates a spirit world and can integrate that with Western education with no problem. The problem we have in the, quote, Western world is that we consider a spirit world and the real world, if you even believe in the possibility of a spirit world, to be separate and distinct. So there's a fundamental problem in our belief systems and what evidence we're willing to accept. But I think it's overwhelming in favor.
Now, you had some involvement somehow with remote viewing as well?
I've certainly been on the tangent of that, and I was with IRVA when it was on their board when it was formed, so quite familiar with the participants and the technology, yeah.
That's a fascinating topic. Of course, it's way off of the UFO topic, but for me, when I've looked into that a little bit, it's really, really interesting. And yeah, there are a lot of things that are unexplainable, and that's going to steer us toward your involvement with the Skinwalker Ranch. I've had a lot of email conversations with George Knapp. I've never been able to get him on the show. He's a very busy guy. I'm sure you know that. But let's talk about that. So you're involved with Bob Bigelow, and how did it come about where you were on this team there at the Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, I was with Bob the day he bought the ranch, so I was the first one of our folks to actively, stay up there. The others, over time, spent a lot more time than I did, but we would go up and just watch. I've got to say, when the things that I personally observed there, I did not see anything that isn't pretty explainable personally. That said, there were a number of incidents that happened with our guys there that just, again, totally overwhelming and absolutely happened and so bizarre. This is one of the problems, and in fact, again, in the book, I did address that in what I call the precognitive sentience phenomena, meaning that UFOs were a piece of that, but only a small piece. But the phenomena were very broad and in considerable depth. And the point was that we would, we would start studying things, and then an incident would happen, you start to study it, and then phenomena would go, oh, you like that? Try this, and you would get something totally different.
Now, why would you think in one spot like that, one area like that, so many things were happening? Any ideas? Did anyone try to come up with something?
Oh, many things. We had the place instrumented, but with all of us, and we were monitoring. We had time-lapse photography 24/7, and it was, one of the most phenomenal incidents that happened was a case where we had 4 cameras on posts about 20 feet high looking to the west, and one of the outer cameras suddenly stopped working. Now, the way it works is the cameras, CCTs, are on top of the post. There's wires going up. You got about half a roll of duct tape holding on. When they got close to the ground, there was PVC fixing it so it would be protected. And this, we know when it stopped recording, and something had reached up and pulled the wires loose from the camera. The entire duct tape was gone. There was about a 3-foot chunk of the wire that was totally missing. The PVC had been pulled loose. The U-clamps holding it were gone. What was even more interesting was at the time that this happened, the cattle were kind of standing around right near the pole where these incidents happened. the significance of that is that if anybody got near the cattle, they would scatter, and absolutely nothing happened. And yet nothing shows up on the camera that is staring at the one where all this mischief occurred.
Wow. Now, how long was it that someone physically looked at the camera and the pole and everything after the incident?
Oh, spent lots of time. They set the wire out for analysis as to what cut it. There's lots and lots of nothing. Absolutely nothing made sense there. And again, instrumented and should have been on camera, but there's absolutely nothing there. And it was from the incidents. There were many, many incidents that happened up at the ranch. And I said it's precognitive in that something knows how you are going to respond to stimuli, an accident or an incident, before it even occurs. It's certainly intelligent and certainly phenomenal. You think of a trickster or whatnot. Something was there, and it was totally in charge. And every time you get to working on it, it would go, oh, you like that? Try this, and you would get something totally different.
What the one thing when I read the book that really intrigued me was the talk about, I think there was 2 or 3 people watching. They saw what looked like a portal or something, and something.
2 guys.
Yeah, and then the being of whatever it was crawling out of it.
Crawler, what you see is a dim light, probably about 3 feet above the ground. It wasn't quite there. And something, the head and shoulders popped itself up and, went running off. And this was a kind of a powdery dirt road, and you went down and, no footprints.
So bizarre.
But something definitely came out from somewhere when running off.
It just makes you wonder why there's places where all these different, especially I've never heard of so many different things happen in one location in that place. What about now? What do we know now? What's going on there?
I don't know. I've not been in touch with them. What happened eventually was the event sort of slowed down, and Bob got more interested in space, in running Bigelow Aerospace, and went off in that direction.
Right. So we had, there were, like you said, there were a couple of UFO sightings. When I was reading the book, I remember that there was not talked about too many, maybe 3 or 4 times that subject came up. Cryptoids, different, like large dogs and animals, and so I do recommend that book to the listener out there. It's a
Thirst for the Skinwalker.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and so what other things were, when you were there, what was it like being there? Was it a lot of sitting around and waiting for something to happen?
Well, I had a shootout with Jesse Ventura, and that was one of the things. He said, can I get you up to the ranch? And I said, well, no. And I said, besides, you'd be really bored. Because, again, we had phenomenal incidents occur, but when you split that up over 6 years, it's not like, weird stuff popping every night or anything like that.
So,
and yet, periodically, these phenomenal events did occur.
Uh-huh. And the cattle mutilations here, that's how it all began, didn't it? Or shortly after, the family that moved there?
There were several cases. Terry had lots and lots of problems at the ranch. I would recommend the book because it covers many of the incidents. One of the strangest ones that happened under our watch was, I forget the year, this was written up in the book, I think I used it, but anyway, it was calving season, and Jerry went out, found a newborn. What they would do was tag it and weigh it. The tag associates it with the mother. Drove across the field, and this is just as flat as you can imagine, totally open, complete line of sight, no problem there. Finds another newborn, tags it, weighs it, and he comes back in about 45 minutes elapsed time, and calf one is dead. Not only is it dead, it's been mutilated, exsanguinated, ears been chopped off, the femur, there's one, I think the femur was separated from the body, but about 20 pounds of stuff, excuse me, is just missing.
Wow.
And like I say, it happened in broad daylight.
Huh.
Gesundheit. People said, well, the blood just went into the ground. We had them get the blood from a butcher shop, pour it on the ground, and weeks later you'd say, no, that's where the blood was poured on the ground. So that did not account for all of the things that happened. The ear with the tag on looked like it had been almost surgically removed. Very, very clean. There were knife marks on some of the other bones and other cuts on there.
Wow.
So here's one that happened. Like I said, the problem with most cattle mutilations is you have no idea when they occurred. People think that ranchers see their cattle on a continuous basis. Reality is that in the summer they'll turn them loose, and you may not see them for weeks or a month at a time. So you come across a dead calf, and you don't know when the incident occurred or what degree, and some of that is certainly predation, but there's other kinds of incidents that happen that certainly do not answer that. And this particular one was such a case, and we had George, and that was a DBM was on the scene within a few hours and be able to do a necropsy on it, and just defies all reasonable explanation.
One of the strangest mutilations I've ever heard about was one that happened there as well. Is the one that appeared that it was like picked up and dropped head first into a hole. Are you familiar with that in the book?
Don't remember that particular one. There were several that we thought were dropped or looked like. In fact, the analysis on it, when we looked at what had happened, and, you shoot cattle rustlers, so,
right.
The idea that, and we looked at all of the, the potential big predators and things like that, and this did not fit any known predator. But it, the best guess was whatever happened to it happened someplace else. Now, having said that, then you've got to have a way to pick the calf up, go chop it up and all that, and come back and drop it in. So this may be the same incident, because there were a number of strange ones. But what was unique about this is we had an absolute, time hack from beginning to end on it.
Right. Now, were there, like you said about the cattle, the cattle's very important to a rancher. Getting a little bit of feedback. Is your phone on speaker or anything like that?
No.
For some reason, okay. Sounds okay now. Were there any other animals, horses or anything, any other type of mutilations?
Oh, it happened all the time. Yeah. There were lots of other incidents. And that one, what was unique about that was that, again, you had a start time and a end time, if you will, in a very short period on a bright, sunny, morning. 10 o'clock in the morning, high, good visibility, nothing explains, the incident.
Yeah, that's always intrigued me. And whether it has anything to do with UFOs, you hear about every once in a while, someone will say they had a sighting, and then, the next day there was a cattle mutilation. It's just another one of those unexplainables.
Yeah, but there again, this is, I think, one of the big errors that they make, and that is establishing causal relationship. The incident that I just described, there's no known sighting that occurred. I do know of others, and they try to make the relationship, and that gets pretty damn tenuous.
Now, I watched a long time ago Linda Moulton Howe's first. She did a documentary years ago on cattle mutilation. I thought was pretty decent. What's your opinion on that? Did you get to watch that?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's whatever you think it is. I mean, there certainly were some strange things that happened, and that was in, again, the early days, and it would appear to be the early days of these kinds of occurrences. So
now, this is a thing, people always talk about, well, there's no evidence for UFOs, or, the skeptics say there's, UFOs aren't important because there's no way to get any evidence that they're here, which some people would argue that.
That's not true. I mean, basically every sensor system we have pick them up. They are picked up by satellites.
Well,
you get camera sightings on a continuous basis. You've got acoustic sensors. We've had magnetic sensors, et cetera, et cetera. You've had, like Bentwaters radiation, radar. So when you say there's no evidence, what you're really saying is I'm not going to take the time to look.
Right. So the point I was making in that statement is that as far as that's what a skeptic will say. Well, as far as cattle mutilations, people will say there's no evidence that something unusual is going on. It's a coyote getting the soft tissue or whatever.
Well, predation is the classic answer that comes up.
Yeah, but
but it obviously, in cases like I just described, was basically, again, happened broad daylight, short period of time. There's no way in hell that was predation.
Right, and so, but the one thing that puzzles me on this whole situation of cattle mutilations is that nobody has ever seen one actually happening. With cameras, with it just seems like the ranchers would, with all the ones that have been lost over the years, and that's money, that's their gold.
We're back to the same issue of, you say, all the ones that have been lost. Yeah, when you put it in a single stack, sounds like a lot. When you look at it, over 50, 60 years, they're actually pretty rare occurrences. The one thing about the ranch was that they, a lot of this activity did seem to be concentrated in that area.
Right.
But it was such a wide variety of things. And again, if I go back to, remember, we had incidents happen, we had it instrumented, and it was like every time you tried to do something, it would go, it being this controller, whatever it is, the great trickster, if you will, it would change it. And again, it would know what you were planning to do before you did it. And every time, we did a lot of. We went to animal centers, the pens, putting dogs in the pens, saying, "Okay, let's have." And the reason for the pens was so we knew exactly where they were and how they would respond. that didn't work. It whatever it is in charge.
Wow. And I believe that the Native Americans, local Native Americans, have said that something in that area has been happening, like throughout their ancestry.
Yeah, that's one of the things we did know, that people talk about Terry, who was the guy that Bob bought the ranch from, but these strange things in the area certainly predated everybody that we know.
Mm-hmm. Now, was anyone there ever that you're aware of? Did you ever feel scared being there?
No.
So you never felt like anything threatening, even though something unusual was happening all the time? Not all the time, but I mean...
There was one that I think they talk about who seemed to be more sensitive than the rest of us, who was aware of the fear would not have been one of the descriptions, but certainly awareness. And there was at one time, it was almost a predator, if you're going back to the movie-like thing, something moving up through the trees, and got the sensing that a mental message that says, "We are watching you."
Wow.
And but again, the incidents, while very, very dramatic, were by and large rare. It wasn't like you could set up and say, "Okay, we're going to go out Wednesday night and have an incident occur."
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what.
Wish we could do that, but this is where I get back to this, the trickster and whatever it is being in charge. It totally determines what's going to happen.
So in that case, when Terry was there earlier with him and his family and running the ranch, all those things were happening. When Bob bought the place, did things slow down immediately, or was that a gradual?
No, they would fluctuate. Some of it seemed to be cyclical,
mm-hmm.
But certainly not predictable. Nothing was predictable.
Right. Now, were ghost-like things? I can't remember. Did anything like that happen there as well?
Ghost-like things.
Yeah, I mean, was there any ghost sightings in the house? Or, I mean, there's so many different things happened. I just wondered if that was part of it. I can't remember. I read the book quite a while ago.
Yeah. I guess you'd have to go back and say, what do you mean by ghosts? And we may be moving to a whole new phenomena here, but there were certainly things that happened that have no correlation in physical reality as we know it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's just say, were you aware of any poltergeist type of situations where things were moved or anything like that?
Oh, Terry describes that happening continuously. Yes.
Okay.
Just put stuff down, and you go to get something, and you find the shovel up in the tree, or
mm-hmm.
gloves moved and things like that. And of course, then you start by, wait a minute, where did I put it? Because it's not like you were laying things out and saying, I'm going to, expecting something weird to happen, but it did happen.
Yeah. We got about 6 or 8 minutes, something like that, left. And so if you're in the message board, you're welcome to pose a question. One of the things I wanted to jump back to the UFO topic. It looks like, about 7 minutes or so. I wanted, if you would, to tell us what you think about... you mentioned crafts up to a mile long. That makes me think of the Phoenix Lights. So,
fantastic case. I know Lynn, so you had her on. Again, this is one where you have thousands of witnesses, and of course, one of the problems is that it wasn't Phoenix. the incident started here close to where I am in Henderson, Nevada, and you have it time synchronized down over Kingman, Arizona, Prescott, over Phoenix, and all the way down to Tucson, and possibly coming back. Again, literally thousands of witnesses. And another aspect that folks think of this as a single incident, and what Lynn says is, no, this stuff happened periodically, not nearly as dramatically as, the lights and all of that, but she's certainly taken photos, lives high up enough that actually looks down on strange things flying in the area. So certainly not a singular incident. Right,
yes. The thing that intrigues me about that is Fife Symington. That's one of the ones who he actually comes forward and says he saw that in the park. Was that the one thing that I'm a little confused on? Was that the same night that everyone saw it, that Fife Symington went to the park and saw it? Are you familiar with that?
The which now?
The Governor Symington.
Well, Symington said that he saw it, and I think what he did was absolutely atrocious. When he had his press conference and had his aide come in, or chief of staff, dressed up as a big alien, ha, isn't it funny, when he himself had actually seen whatever it was, the phenomena. So that's where you get the vast number of witnesses, and I think it's a classic example of how not to treat these things. We haven't got into hoaxes, but I think hoaxes are significant in that they are, they're treated as if harmless diversions, and I think that's absolutely not true. I think that they really do a great disservice, and particularly to folks who are trying to figure out what in the hell the real phenomena are.
Right. YouTube is full of, today with the CGI technology, and there's a couple of channels that are there that are just looking for lots of views because they make, money per month, that are putting out some videos. So that's all part of hoaxing. Hoaxing's been around, whatever the subject is, forever. It's unfortunate. It's all part of our society, and really the only thing we can do about it is just beware of it, really.
But like I say, the hoaxers see themselves as benign, and I don't. I think they're really detrimental to the whole process.
I do too. It's I'm in the fine arts and antiques, and I feel the same way about things that are faked, and the people that'll fake documents, they'll fake paintings, they'll fake anything that's worth money. They will fake. And even if it's a $5 Vietnamese army patch, they'll fake that. Anything. So we really don't have too much time left. I would love to talk more about hoaxes. What do you think, just to wrap this up, is, in your opinion, a hoax that really got under your skin? Is there any in particular, or just hoaxes in general?
I would put it in general. There was a classic one. I think it was New Jersey, where they were, using balloons and putting lanterns in them and sending it aloft to have people report UFOs. Phenomenally dangerous to begin with. Because those things fall down and the flares may not go out, starting fires and whatnot. And what was most disconcerting is that you had, fairly legitimate, in the skeptical agencies, if you will, saying, isn't this wonderful that, they have proven how how gullible, people were. I said, no, it was just flat-ass dangerous.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the Chinese lanterns. That was a little more elaborate, but the Chinese lanterns, I consider them dangerous. I mean, yeah. I understand how they work. They have to cool down, which means the candle's supposed to go out before they drop. But still, they just, in general, they can catch on fire. And
well, remember, if you go back to World War II, there was actually a plot by the Japanese to firebomb the Northwest using similar technology. They were going to send balloons over and with flares and have them burn the Northwest. Kind of a harebrained scheme, but nonetheless was seriously thought about.
Oh, I think I did hear about that, John. So we're getting ready to close here. Can you give out you do have a website?
Correct.
And why don't you give out that web address?
Well, the easiest thing to do is just Google my name rather than the website, John B. Alexander, middle initial B. Boy, and Google will take you right to it.
And we didn't even talk about the title of your book. It's that came out a few years ago. It's on Amazon.
UFOs, myths, conspiracies, and realities.
Yeah, I like the title. That's good. All right, John. Well, thanks so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, thank you now.
All right. So that's it, everyone. I appreciate you listening this evening. And if you're a supporter and you're listening to this, I appreciate that as well. If you're listening live, you want to go to our website, podcastufo.com, and you'll see the support the show button. You can go down into the sign-in. I think it's Ron Felber we have on next week. He is a scientist, and he's going to be talking about an encounter, a couple that had an encounter years ago. He's really done in-depth research. He's also an author of a book. And so that will be next week. I want to thank some people for helping out with the show. Keith Rowland for helping us with the live part of the show. And I want to thank Michael Lauk for taking over the show last week. He did a wonderful job. I think we're out of time, and we're going to have to go to music. So thanks, everyone. And Peggy's helping out with the Facebook page. And I'm glad to be back in America. And keep your eyes to the sky, everyone.